The crack of impact reverberated through the room like thunder. Sharp pain blazed across my face as I staggered back, my palm reaching instinctively for the crimson welt spreading on my cheek. The holiday roast sat abandoned on the table while 14 sets of eyes watched me. Some wide with shock, others gleaming with vindication, all utterly silent. My husband Derek loomed above me, fists still clenched, breathing ragged with fury. "Never humiliate me before my relatives again," he hissed, venom dripping from every word. His mother smirked from her seat. His cousin laughed quietly. His aunt scoffed as though I'd earned this. Then, cutting through the suffocating silence came a voice, small but razor-sharp. "Papa." Every head swiveled toward my 10-year-old daughter Sophie, standing near the bay window with her device pressed against her chest. Her hazel eyes, mirrors of my own, held something that shifted the entire atmosphere. Something that made Derek's arrogant expression falter. "You made a mistake," she said, her tone unervingly steady for a child. "Uncle James will see everything now." Color vanished from Derek's face. His relatives exchanged bewildered looks, but I detected something else emerging in their expressions, an unnamed dread they couldn't yet identify. "What nonsense are you spouting?" Derek demanded, though his voice wavered. Sophie tilted her head, examining him with the detachment of a researcher studying a specimen. "I've been documenting you, Papa. All of it for many weeks. I uploaded everything to Uncle James this morning." The silence that descended was absolute. Derek's family began shifting uncomfortably, suddenly grasping that something had gone catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. "He wanted me to inform you," Sophie continued, her small voice carrying the weight of approaching disaster, "that he's coming here now." That's when their faces went pale. That's when the pleading started. 4 hours earlier, I'd been in that same kitchen, mechanically preparing the roast while my hands trembled from exhaustion. The bruise on my abdomen from last week's lesson still throbbed with each movement, but I couldn't reveal it. Not with Derek's relatives arriving. Not when any weakness would become ammunition. "Rebecca, where are my dress shoes?" Derek's voice thundered from upstairs, making me flinch involuntarily. "In the wardrobe, dear, left section, lower shelf," I called back, voice carefully calibrated to prevent another eruption. Sophie sat at the counter, ostensibly working on assignments, but I knew she was observing me. She constantly observed now, those perceptive eyes missing nothing. At 10 years old, she'd learned to interpret warning signs better than I had. The tension in Derek's posture when he entered, the specific throat clearing before launching into tirades, the ominous quiet preceding his worst moments. "Mama," she said softly, not lifting her gaze from her mathematics. "Are you all right?" The question struck me like a physical blow. How many times had she asked? How many times had I lied, insisting everything was fine? Papa was simply stressed. Adults sometimes argued, but it meant nothing. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I whispered, the falsehood bitter in my mouth. Sophie's pencil stopped moving. "No, you're not." Before I could respond, Derek's heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs. "Rebecca, this house is a disaster. My mother arrives in an hour and you can't even." He stopped mid-sentence upon seeing Sophie watching him. For one brief instant, something resembling shame flickered across his features, but it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. "Sophie, go to your room," he said curtly. "But Papa, I'm finishing homework like you." "Now." Sophie gathered her materials slowly, deliberately. As she passed me, she squeezed my hand, a tiny gesture of solidarity that nearly shattered my heart. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at Derek. "Be kind to Mama," she said simply. Derek's jaw clenched. "What did you say?" "She's been cooking all day, even though she's exhausted. So please just be kind." The audacity of a 10-year-old confronting her father left Derek momentarily speechless. But I saw the dangerous flash in his eyes, the way his hands balled into fists. "Sophie, leave," I said quickly, attempting to defuse the situation. She nodded and vanished upstairs, but not before I caught the determined set of her jaw, so reminiscent of my brother when he was preparing for battle. "That child is becoming too insolent," Derek muttered, redirecting his attention to me. "You're raising her to be disrespectful." "She's just protective," I said carefully. "She doesn't like seeing." "Seeing what?" His voice dropped to that dangerous whisper that froze my blood. "Are you telling her stories about us, Rebecca?" "No, Derek, I would never. Because if you're poisoning my daughter against me, there will be repercussions." His daughter. As though I had no claim to the child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through every illness, comforted through every nightmare. The doorbell chimed, rescuing me from having to respond. Derek straightened his collar and transformed instantly into the charming husband and son his relatives knew and adored. The switch was so seamless it was terrifying. "Showtime," he said with an icy smile. "Remember, we're the ideal family." Derek's relatives descended upon our home like a swarm of well-dressed parasites, each carrying their own arsenal of passive-aggressive remarks and thinly veiled attacks. His mother, Patricia, swept in first, her critical gaze immediately scanning the house for imperfections. "Oh, Rebecca dear," she said in that saccharine tone dripping with condescension. "You've attempted something with the decorations. How quaint." I'd spent 4 days perfecting those decorations. Derek's cousin Brandon arrived with his wife Amanda, both sporting designer clothing and superior smirks. "Smells decent in here," Brandon said, then added under his breath, "for once." The real barb came from Derek's aunt Diane, who made a show of embracing me while whispering, "You look exhausted, Rebecca. Not sleeping well." Derek always mentions stressed wives age faster. I forced a smile and nodded, playing my role in this twisted performance. But I noticed Sophie standing in the doorway, her device in her hands, those sharp eyes cataloging every slight, every cruel comment, every moment her father failed to defend me. Throughout the meal, the pattern continued. Derek basked in his relatives' attention, while they systematically diminished me with surgical precision. "Rebecca's always been so uncomplicated," Patricia said while cutting her meat. "Limited education, you understand." Derek really settled. "But he's such a noble man for caring for her." Derek didn't contradict her. He never did. "Remember when Rebecca tried returning to college?" Dan laughed. "What was it?" "Physical therapy." Derek had to intervene. Someone needed to prioritize the family. That wasn't how it happened. I'd been accepted into a program, had aspirations of financial independence, of a meaningful career. Derek had sabotaged my application, told me I was too incompetent to succeed, that I'd embarrass him by failing. But I said nothing. I smiled and refilled their glasses and pretended their words didn't slice through me like shattered glass. Sophie, however, had stopped eating entirely. She sat rigid in her chair, small hands clenched in her lap, watching her father's relatives dismantle her mother piece by piece. The breaking point came when Brandon started discussing his wife's recent promotion. "Amanda's making senior partner at her firm," he announced proudly. Naturally, she's always been the ambitious type, not satisfied with merely existing. The word existing hung in the air like a slap. Even Amanda looked uncomfortable with her husband's cruelty. "That's wonderful," I said genuinely, because despite everything, I was happy for any woman succeeding professionally. "It is," Patricia chimed in. "So refreshing to see a woman with genuine drive and intelligence. Don't you agree, Derek?" Derek's eyes met mine across the table, and I saw the calculation there. The choice between defending his wife or maintaining his relatives' approval. He chose them. He always chose them. Absolutely, he said, raising his glass. To strong, accomplished women. The toast wasn't for me. It was never for me. I excused myself to the kitchen, needing a moment to breathe, to gather the fragments of my dignity scattered across the dining room floor. Through the doorway, I could hear them continuing their assault in my absence. She's gotten so sensitive lately, Derek was saying. Honestly, I don't know how much more drama I can tolerate. You're a saint for enduring it, his mother replied. That's when Sophie's voice cut through their laughter like a blade. Why do you all despise my mama? The dining room fell silent. Sophie, sweetheart. Derek's voice was strained. We don't despise. Yes, you do, Sophie interrupted, her voice steady and clear. You say cruel things about her. You make her sad. You make her cry when you think I'm not watching. I pressed myself against the kitchen wall, my heart hammering in my chest. Darling. Patricia's voice was sickeningly sweet. Sometimes adults have complicated. My mama is the smartest person I know, Sophie continued, gathering momentum. She helps me with my assignments every night. She builds things and repairs things and knows about science and literature and everything. She's kind to everyone, even when they're cruel to her, even when they don't deserve it. The silence stretched taut. She cooks your food and cleans your messes and smiles when you hurt her feelings because she's trying to make everyone happy. But none of you even see her. You just see someone to be cruel to. Sophie, that's enough. Derek's voice held a warning. No, Papa, it's not enough. It's not enough that you make Mama sad. It's not enough that you yell at her and call her stupid. It's not enough that you hurt her. My blood turned to ice. She'd witnessed more than I thought, more than I'd ever wanted her to see. I heard a chair scrape back violently. Go to your room immediately. Derek's voice was deadly quiet. I don't want to. I said now. The sound of his palms striking the table made everyone jump. That's when I rushed back into the dining room, unable to let my daughter face his anger alone. Derek, please, I said, stepping between him and Sophie. She's just a child. She doesn't understand. Doesn't understand what? His eyes were blazing now. His composure finally cracking before his relatives. Doesn't understand that her mother is a pathetic weak. Don't call her that. Sophie's voice rose, fierce and protective. Don't you dare call my mama names. I'll call her whatever I want, Derek roared, advancing on both of us. This is my house, my family, and you'll what? I found myself saying my own breaking point finally reached. Strike a 10-year-old before your relatives. Show them what you really are. The room went deadly silent. Derek's relatives stared at us, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Derek's face contorted with rage. How dare you, he whispered. How dare you make me appear like what you are? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Like someone who hurts his wife. Like someone who terrorizes his own child. That's when his hand came up. That's when the world exploded into pain and humiliation and the crushing weight of public betrayal. And that's when Sophie stepped forward and changed everything. 1 month earlier. Mama, can you assist me with my school assignment? I looked up from the pile of bills I'd been sorting. Medical bills from the emergency room visit Derek's relatives didn't know about, the one where I told the doctors I'd fallen down the stairs. Sophie stood in the doorway of my bedroom, her device in her hands and an expression I couldn't quite read on her face. Of course, sweetheart. What's the assignment about? Family dynamics, she said carefully. We have to document how families interact and communicate. Something in her tone made me uneasy. What do you mean, document? Take videos, record conversations, show examples of how family members treat each other. Her eyes met mine, dark and serious. Ms. Peterson says it's important to understand what healthy families look like versus other kinds. My heart clenched. Sophie's teacher had always been perceptive, Always asked the right questions when Sophie came to school with shadows under her eyes or flinched when adults raised their voices. Sophie, I began carefully. You know that some things that happen in families are private, right? Not everything needs to be shared or recorded. I know, she said, but there was something in her voice, a determination that reminded me so strongly of my brother, it took my breath away. But Miss Peterson says documenting things can be important for understanding, for protection. The word protection hung between us like a loaded weapon. That night, after Derek had screamed at me for purchasing the wrong brand of tea and slammed the bedroom door so hard it shook the house, Sophie appeared in my doorway. "Mama," she whispered. "Are you okay?" I was sitting on my bed, holding an ice pack to my shoulder where he'd grabbed me, leaving finger-shaped bruises that would be hidden under long sleeves tomorrow. "I'm fine, baby," I lied automatically. Sophie stepped into the room and closed the door softly behind her. "Mama, I need to tell you something." Something in her voice made me look up. She seemed older suddenly, carrying a weight no child should bear. "I've been thinking," she said, climbing onto the bed beside me, "about my assignment about families." "Sophie, I know Papa hurts you," she said quietly, the words falling between us like stones into still water. "I know you pretend he doesn't, but I know." My throat closed. "Sweetheart, sometimes adults—" "Miss Peterson showed us a video," Sophie interrupted, "about families where people get hurt. She said if we ever see anything like that we should tell someone. Someone who can help." "Sophie, you can't. I've been recording, Mama." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" Sophie's small hands trembled as she held up her device. "I've been recording him when he's cruel to you. When he yells and when he hurts you. Have videos, Mama. Many of them." Horror and hope warred in my chest. "Sophie, you can't, if your father discovers." "He won't," she said with frightening certainty. "I'm careful. I'm really, really careful." She opened her device and showed me a folder labeled Family Assignment. Inside were dozens of video files, each one time-stamped and dated. "Sophie, this is dangerous. If he catches you—" "Mama," she said, her small hand covering mine. "I won't let him hurt you anymore. I have a plan." The look in her eyes, ancient and determined and absolutely fearless, chilled me to the bone. What kind of plan? Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the bedspread. "Uncle James always said that bullies only understand one thing. My brother, of course." Sophie adored my brother, called him every week, listened with rapt attention to his stories about leadership and courage and standing up for what's right. He was a lieutenant colonel in the military, a man who commanded respect and had never backed down from a fight in his life. "Sophie, you can't involve Uncle James. This is between your father and me." "No, it's not," she said firmly. "It's about our family, our real family. And Uncle James always says family protects family." Over the next month, I watched my 10-year-old daughter become someone I barely recognized. She was still sweet, still my baby, but there was a steel in her spine that hadn't been there before. She moved through the house like a tiny soldier on a mission, documenting every cruel word, every raised hand, every moment Derek showed his true nature. She was careful, devastatingly careful. The device was always positioned innocuously, propped against books or hidden behind picture frames. She never filmed for long, just captured the worst moments and then stopped. Derek never suspected that his own daughter was building a case against him, piece by damning piece. I tried to stop her twice. The first time she simply said, "Mama, someone has to protect us." The second time she showed me a video of Derek shoving me into the counter so hard it left a bruise on my hip. "Look at yourself," she said quietly. "Look how small you make yourself. Look how scared you are." In the video, I was indeed cowering, trying to make myself invisible as Derek towered over me. His face twisted with rage over something trivial. I'd forgotten to buy his specific brand of coffee. This isn't love, Mama, Sophie said with heartbreaking wisdom. Love doesn't look like this. 3 weeks before the holiday, Sophie made her first call to Uncle James. I only discovered this because I walked into her room to say goodnight and heard her small voice through the door. Uncle James, what would you do if someone was hurting Mama? My blood froze. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath. What do you mean, sweetheart? My brother's voice was gentle but alert, the way it got when he sensed trouble. Just hypothetically, if someone was being cruel to her, really cruel, what would you do? There was a long pause. Sophie, is your Mama okay? Is someone bothering her? It's just a question, Uncle James. For my school assignment. Another pause. Well, hypothetically, anyone who hurt your mother would have to answer to me. You know that, right? Your Mama is my sister, and I will always protect her. Always. Even if it was someone in our family. Especially then. My brother's voice was steel. Family doesn't hurt family, Sophie. Real family protects each other. Okay, Sophie said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. That's what I thought. The next morning, Sophie showed me a text message on her device. She'd sent my brother a simple note. Starting to worry about Mama. Can you help? His response was immediate. Always. Call me anytime. I love you both. He's ready, Sophie said simply. Ready for what? Sophie looked at me with those ancient eyes. To rescue us. The morning of the holiday, Sophie was unusually calm. While I rushed around making last-minute preparations, she sat at the breakfast table methodically eating her cereal and watching Derek with an intensity that should have been disturbing in a child. Derek was already on edge. His relatives' visits always brought out the worst in him. The need to appear in control, the pressure to maintain his image as the successful patriarch. He'd already snapped at me 4 times before 9 a.m., once for using the wrong serving dishes, twice for breathing too loudly, and once for simply existing in his presence. Remember, he said, straightening his collar in the hallway mirror, today we are the perfect family. Loving husband, devoted wife, well-behaved child. Can you manage that, Rebecca? Yes, I whispered. And you? He turned to Sophie. No more of that attitude you've been displaying lately. Children should be seen and not heard when the adults are talking. Sophie nodded solemnly. I understand, Papa. Something about her easy compliance should have warned him. But Derek was too focused on his own performance to notice the calculating look in his daughter's eyes. His relatives arrived in waves, each member bringing their own special brand of toxicity. They settled into our living room like they owned it, immediately beginning their ritual of subtle humiliation. Rebecca dear, Patricia said, accepting a glass of wine. You really should do something about those gray roots. Derek works so hard to provide. The least you could do is take care of yourself. Derek laughed. Actually laughed. Mother's right. I keep telling her she's letting herself go. I felt the familiar burn of shame, but when I glanced at Sophie, I saw her small fingers moving across her device screen. She was recording. The afternoon continued in much the same vein. Every time I entered a room, the conversation would shift to subtle digs about my appearance, my intelligence, my worth as a wife and mother. And every time, Derek either joined in or remained silent, his complicity more devastating than outright cruelty. But Sophie was documenting it all. During the meal, as Derek carved the roast with theatrical precision, his relatives launched into their most vicious attack yet. You know, Brandon said, Amanda and I were just saying how fortunate Derek is that you're so accommodating, Rebecca. Some wives would make a fuss about, well, everything. What do you mean? I asked, though I knew I shouldn't have. Dan giggled. Oh, come on. The way you just accept everything. Never fight back. Never stand up for yourself. It's almost admirable how completely you've surrendered. She knows her place, Derek said, and the cruel satisfaction in his voice made something inside me finally snap. My place, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca. Derek's voice held a warning, but I couldn't stop. 4 years of accumulated humiliation, of swallowed pride, of protecting my daughter from a truth that was destroying us both. It all came pouring out. My place is to cook your food and clean your messes and smile while your relatives tell me how worthless I am. My place is to disappear while you take credit for everything I do and blame me for everything that goes wrong. Derek's face went white, then red. Rebecca, stop. Now. My place is to pretend I don't see Sophie watching while you. That's when he stood up. That's when his hand came up. That's when everything changed forever. The slap echoed through the room like thunder. Time seemed to slow as I stumbled backward, my cheek burning, my vision blurring with tears of pain and shock. But it wasn't the physical pain that destroyed me. It was the look of satisfaction on his relatives' faces. The way they nodded as if I'd finally gotten what I deserved. Derek stood over me, breathing hard, his hand still raised. Never embarrass me before my relatives again, he snarled. The dining room was silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing and the tick of the antique clock in the corner. 14 pairs of eyes stared at me, some shocked, others satisfied, all waiting to see what would happen next. That's when Sophie stepped forward. Papa. Her voice was so calm, so controlled that it sent chills down my spine. Derek turned toward her, his anger still blazing, ready to unleash his fury on anyone who dared challenge him. What? He snapped. Sophie stood by the window, her device clutched against her chest like a shield. Her hazel eyes, my eyes, were fixed on her father with an intensity that made the air in the room shift. You made a mistake, she said, her voice steady and eerily calm for a child. Derek's anger faltered for just a moment, confusion flickering across his features. What are you talking about? Sophie tilted her head, studying him with the cold assessment of a predator sizing up its prey. Because now Uncle James will see. The change in the room was immediate and electric. Derek's confident posture crumbled. His relatives exchanged confused glances, but I saw something else creeping into their expressions, a flicker of fear they couldn't yet name. What are you talking about? Derek demanded, but his voice cracked on the last word. Sophie held up her device, the screen glowing in the dim dining room light. I've been recording you, Papa. All of it for many weeks. Patricia gasped. Brandon choked on his wine. Diane's fork clattered to her plate. But Sophie wasn't finished. I recorded you calling Mama stupid. I recorded you shoving her. I recorded you throwing the remote at her head. I recorded you making her cry. Her voice never wavered, never lost that terrifying calm. And I sent everything to Uncle James this morning. Derek's face went through a series of colors, red to white to gray, as the implications hit him. My brother wasn't just Sophie's beloved uncle. He was Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, a decorated military officer with connections throughout the base, the community, and the legal system. You little. Derek started toward Sophie, his hand raised. You wouldn't, Sophie said, not moving an inch. Because Uncle James said to tell you something. Derek froze mid-step. He said to tell you that he's reviewed all the evidence. He said to tell you that real men don't hurt women and children. He said to tell you that bullies who hide behind closed doors are cowards. The device chimed with an incoming message. Sophie glanced at the screen and smiled, a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. And he said to tell you, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout, that he's coming here now. The effect was immediate and devastating. Derek's relatives began talking at once, voices overlapping in panic. Derek, what is she talking about? You said they were just arguments. If there are videos, if the colonel sees. We can't be associated with. Derek held up his hands, trying to regain control, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped, and his relatives were seeing him clearly for the first time. It's not what it sounds like, he said desperately. Sophie's just a kid. She doesn't understand. I understand that you hit my mama, Sophie said, her voice cutting through his excuses like a knife. I understand that you scare her. I understand that you make her feel small and worthless because it makes you feel big and important. She paused, looking around the room at Derek's relatives with withering disdain. And I understand that all of you knew and didn't care because it was easier to pretend Mama was the problem. Patricia's face had gone ashen. Sophie, surely you don't think we would support. You called her stupid. You called her worthless. You said Papa settled. You said she was fortunate he tolerated her. Sophie's voice was relentless, cataloging every cruelty with perfect recall. You made her smaller every time you came here. You helped him break her. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek was staring at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, and what he saw clearly terrified him. This wasn't the quiet, obedient child he thought he knew. This was someone who had been watching, learning, planning. How long? He whispered. How long what, Papa? How long have you been recording me? Sophie consulted her device with clinical precision. 47 days, 19 hours, and 42 minutes of footage. Audio recordings of another 31 incidents. The numbers hit the room like physical blows. Derek's cousin Brandon was openly staring, his mouth hanging open. His wife Amanda had tears in her eyes. Jesus, Derek, Brandon breathed. What have you done? I haven't done anything, Derek exploded, his composure finally shattering completely. She's lying. She's a manipulative little. Sophie calmly turned her device around, showing the screen to the room. On it, clear as day, was a video of Derek grabbing me by the throat and slamming me against the kitchen wall while screaming about dinner being 7 minutes late. This was Tuesday, Sophie said conversationally. Would you like to see Wednesday? Or maybe Thursday when you threw the coffee mug at Mama's head? Derek lunged for the device, but Sophie was ready. She darted behind my chair, her finger hovering over the screen. I wouldn't, she said calmly. This is all backed up. Cloud storage. Uncle James's phone. Ms. Peterson's email. The police station's tip line. Derek froze. The police. Uncle James insisted, Sophie said matter-of-factly. He said documentation is important for when bad people need consequences. That's when we heard it. The rumble of engines in the driveway. Car doors slamming. Heavy footsteps on the front porch. Sophie smiled. He's here. The front door didn't just open. It erupted inward as if blown apart by the force of righteous fury itself. My brother filled the doorway like an avenging angel, his military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. Behind him stood two other men I recognized from base functions, both officers, both wearing expressions that could have melted steel. The dining room fell silent except for the sound of Patricia's wine glass shattering on the floor. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell surveyed the room with the cold efficiency of a man who had commanded troops through war zones. His eyes took in everything. My red cheek, Derek's guilty posture, his relatives' stricken faces, and Sophie standing protectively beside me with her device still clutched in her hands. Colonel Mitchell, Derek stammered, his bravado evaporating like smoke. This is unexpected. We weren't. Sit down, my brother said quietly. The command carried such authority that Derek actually took a step backward, but he didn't sit. Sir, I think there's been some misunderstanding. I said sit down. This time, Derek's knees buckled and he collapsed into his chair. His relatives remained frozen, afraid to move or speak. My brother stepped into the room, his companions flanking him like honor guards. Sophie, he said gently, his voice transforming completely when he addressed his niece. "Are you all right?" "Yes, Uncle James," she said, running to him. He scooped her up in one arm while keeping his lethal gaze fixed on Derek. "And your mother?" Sophie's eyes flicked to my burning cheek. "She's hurt, Uncle James." Again. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My brother set Sophie down carefully and approached me, his trained eyes cataloging every visible injury with clinical precision. When he gently touched my cheek, examining the handprint Derek had left there, his jaw clenched so tight I heard his teeth grind. "How long?" he asked quietly. "James. How long, Rebecca?" I couldn't lie to him. Not with Sophie watching, not with the evidence displayed so clearly on my face. 4 years. The words hung in the air like an execution sentence. My brother turned slowly to face Derek, and I had never seen him look more dangerous. Not in combat photos, not in his most intimidating military portraits. Nothing compared to the controlled fury radiating from him now. 4 years, he repeated, his voice conversational. 4 years you've been putting your hands on my sister. "Sir, it's not what you think," Derek began. 4 years you've been terrorizing my niece." "I never touched Sophie. I would never." "You think because you didn't hit her you didn't hurt her." My brother's voice rose slightly and Derek actually whimpered. "You think a child can watch her mother being abused and not be damaged? You think what you've done to this family isn't a crime against that little girl?" Derek's mother finally found her voice. "Colonel Mitchell, surely we can discuss this like civilized adults." My brother's gaze shifted to her and she immediately fell silent. "Mrs. Thompson," he said politely, "your son has been physically and emotionally abusing my sister while you sat in this very room and called her worthless. Your entire family has enabled and encouraged his behavior. You are complicit in every bruise, every tear, every night my niece went to bed afraid." Patricia's face crumpled. "We didn't know." "You knew," Sophie said quietly from beside me. "You just didn't care because it wasn't happening to you." One of my brother's companions, a man I recognized as Major Harrison, stepped forward and placed a tablet on the dining table. "We've reviewed all the evidence," he said formally. "Video documentation of domestic violence, audio recordings of threats and verbal abuse, photographic evidence of injuries, medical records showing repeated accidents." Derek's face had gone completely white. "Those are private medical records. You can't. Your wife signed releases for everything," Major Harrison continued calmly, "retroactively dating back 4 years. She has the right to share her own medical information, especially when it documents crimes against her." "Crimes?" Derek's voice cracked. My brother stepped closer to Derek's chair, his presence overwhelming. "Assault and battery, domestic violence, terroristic threatening, harassment, intimidation of witnesses." "Witnesses?" Derek looked confused. "Your daughter, your wife, anyone who saw the bruises and injuries you caused." My brother's voice was clinical now, methodical. "Sophie's teacher reported her concerns to Child Protective Services 2 months ago. There's already an open file." The room was spinning. I had no idea Sophie's teacher had taken it that far. Had no idea there were official records, formal complaints. "The question," my brother continued, "is what happens next?" Derek's relatives were exchanging panicked glances, finally understanding the magnitude of the situation they'd helped create. "What do you want?" Derek whispered, and the desperation in his voice was almost pathetic. My brother smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "What I want is to take you outside and show you exactly what it feels like to be helpless and afraid. What I want is to make you understand the terror you've put my family through." Derek shrank deeper into his chair. "But what I'm going to do," my brother continued, "is let the law handle you. Because unlike you, I believe in justice, not revenge." He nodded to his other companion, who I now recognized as Captain Morgan from the base legal office. She stepped forward with a folder in her hands. "Mr. Thompson," she said formally, "I'm here to serve you with a temporary restraining order. You are ordered to have no contact with your wife or daughter. You are ordered to vacate this residence immediately." "This is my house," Derek exploded, desperation making him stupid. "Actually," Captain Morgan consulted her papers, "the house is in both your names, but given the circumstances and the evidence of domestic violence, your wife has been granted temporary exclusive occupancy." Derek turned to his relatives looking for support, but found only horrified faces turned away from him. "Mother," he pleaded. "You can't believe." "I've seen the videos, Derek," Patricia said quietly, tears streaming down her face. "We all have. Your grandfather would be ashamed." Brandon stood up slowly, his face gray. "Amanda and I need to leave. We can't be associated with this." "You're my family," Derek shouted, his voice breaking. "No," Diane said, standing as well. "Family doesn't do what you've done. Family protects each other." As Derek's relatives filed out of the house like mourners leaving a funeral, my brother turned his attention to Sophie and me. "Pack a bag," he said gently. "Both of you. You're coming home with me tonight." "But this is our home," I protested weakly. "This was your prison," Sophie said with startling clarity. "Uncle James's house is home." Derek was still sitting at the table, staring at the wreckage of his life. "Rebecca," he said desperately, "please. Can change. Can get help. Don't destroy our family over." "Over what?" I found my voice finally, the words coming stronger than they had in years. "Over you hitting me. Over you terrorizing our daughter. Over 4 years of making us afraid to breathe wrong." "It wasn't that bad, Papa," Sophie interrupted, her voice sad now instead of angry. "I have 47 days of recordings that say it was exactly that bad." Derek looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and seemed to finally understand what he had lost. Not just a wife, not just a house, but the respect and love of the one person who should have looked up to him most. "Sophie, I'm your father," he said brokenly. "No," she said with devastating finality. "Fathers protect their families. Fathers make their children feel safe. You're just the man who used to live here." 7 months later, Sophie and I sat in our new apartment, small but bright with windows that let in actual sunlight and doors that we could lock without fear of who might come through them. The restraining order had held. Derek had been convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by mandatory anger management and supervised visitation with Sophie. Sophie hadn't asked to see him yet. The divorce had been swift and decisive. Derek's relatives, horrified by the public nature of his crimes and terrified of their own legal exposure, had pressured him not to contest anything. I got the house, which I immediately sold. I got half of everything plus substantial support payments. More importantly, I got my life back. "Mama," Sophie said from her spot on the couch where she was doing homework, "Miss Peterson wants to know if you'll speak to her class about resilience." I looked up from my physical therapy textbooks. Yes, I was finally pursuing that degree Derek had convinced me I was too stupid to earn. What would I say? Sophie considered this seriously. Maybe that being strong doesn't mean staying quiet. Maybe that protecting someone sometimes means being brave enough to ask for help. My 10-year-old daughter, who had orchestrated the downfall of a grown man through pure strategic thinking and unwavering determination, was giving me advice about courage. "What about you?" I asked. "Are you okay with everything that happened?" Sophie set down her pencil and looked at me with those ancient eyes that had seen too much but somehow remained clear and hopeful. "Mama, do you remember what you used to say when I had nightmares? Tell me. You'd tell me that brave people aren't the ones who aren't scared. Brave people are the ones who are scared but do the right thing anyway." I nodded, remembering countless nights when I'd whispered those words while she trembled in my arms after hearing us fight. "You were brave," she said simply. "You stayed to protect me even when staying hurt you. And I was brave because I knew I had to protect you. We protected each other." Tears blurred my vision. "I should have left sooner. I should have—" "Mama," Sophie interrupted gently. "You left when you were ready. You left when it was safe. You left when you knew we'd be okay." She was right. Of course, my brilliant, remarkable daughter was right. The truth was, I hadn't left. We had escaped. And we had escaped because a 10-year-old girl had been braver and smarter and more strategic than any adult in the situation. She had seen what needed to happen and made it happen. Methodically, carefully, and with devastating effectiveness. "Do you miss him?" I asked quietly. "Your father." Sophie was quiet for a long moment. "I miss the idea of what a father should be. But I don't miss being afraid all the time. I don't miss watching you get smaller and sadder every day. I don't miss him being cruel." She paused, then added, "But I like who you are now. You're getting bigger again." She was right about that too. I was getting bigger, stronger, louder. I laughed more. I slept better. I had opinions again, dreams again, hopes for the future again. "Mama." Sophie's voice was small now, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think other kids have to do what I did? Record their parents and make plans and all of that?" The question broke my heart. "I hope not, baby. I really hope not. But if they do," she said, her voice growing stronger, "I want them to know they can. That they're not tattling or being bad. That sometimes kids have to save their families because the adults can't." I set aside my textbooks and pulled her into my arms. This child who had saved us both. "You know what, Sophie?" "What?" "I think you might be the bravest person I've ever known." She snuggled against me. And for a moment she was just my little girl again. Not the strategic mastermind who had brought down her abuser with military precision. "I learned it from Uncle James," she said. "And from you. You just forgot for a while." Outside our apartment windows, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Tomorrow I had classes and Sophie had school. And we both had therapy appointments where we continued to process everything that had happened. But tonight we were safe. We were free. We were home. And Derek was exactly where he belonged, paying the consequences for his choices, stripped of his power, his family, and his victims. Sometimes justice looks like a 10-year-old girl with a device and a plan. Sometimes revenge is just letting the truth speak for itself. 4 years later, Sophie is now 14. I still have all the videos. Mama thinks I deleted them after the trial, but I didn't. They're stored in 4 different places now, encrypted and password protected. Ms. Peterson, who's now Vice Principal Peterson, taught me about digital security and evidence preservation. She says I have good instincts for justice. Mama graduated from physical therapy school last year. She works in the emergency room now, helping other people who come in with accidents and falls. She's good at seeing the signs, good at asking the right questions, good at helping people find their courage. She tells them about a little girl who saved her family with a device and a lot of patience. Uncle James says I have the makings of a good officer. He's teaching me about leadership and strategy and standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Derek, I don't call him Papa anymore, and he knows better than to ask me to. Gets out of prison next month. He writes me letters sometimes, asking for forgiveness, asking for a chance to be a father again. I don't write back. Mama says I might change my mind when I'm older, when I have more perspective. Maybe she's right. But right now I remember everything. I remember being 10 years old and watching my mother shrink a little more each day. I remember making a choice to save us both. And I remember that bullies only understand consequences. He had 18 months to learn what consequences feel like. Whether that's enough time for him to become a better person, well, that's up to him. But he'll never get the chance to hurt us again. I made sure of that. Sometimes at school, kids ask me about what happened. The story made the local news for a while. 10-year-old documents father's abuse, leads to conviction. Most kids think it's impressive that I helped catch a bad guy. Some kids ask me if I feel bad about getting my dad in trouble. I tell them I didn't get him in trouble. He got himself in trouble by making bad choices. I just made sure those choices had consequences. Ms. Peterson says that's a very mature way to think about it. Mama says that's a very me way to think about it. Uncle James says that's a very Mitchell way to think about it. Mitchells protect their own, and they don't back down from bullies. I think they're all right. Last week, a girl in my class told me her stepfather hits her mom. She asked me what she should do. I gave her my old device, the one with a good camera, and taught her how to use the recording app. Just remember, I told her, you're not tattling. You're gathering evidence. And evidence is power. She nodded very seriously, the way I probably looked when I was 10 and making my own plans. Will you help me? She asked. Yes, I said without hesitation. But you have to be very, very careful. 'Cause that's what we do. That's what our family does. We protect each other and we protect people who need protecting. And bullies. Bullies learn that the Mitchell family doesn't forget. And we don't forgive people who hurt the ones we love. We just make sure they face consequences.